First of all, thank you for this interview. Thank you for the time. Introduction I will give on Croatian, and we can start with questions. First of all, what is shamanism, and what was your part to this old tradition?
Yes. For me, shamanism is an interesting word because it comes from the Siberian language, so it doesn't actually mean anything except in the anthropological way. It describes a primitive practice that is similar in many places, in primitive cultures, in South America, Australia, Tahiti. So, it's a terminology that's a bit misleading because every culture is very unique and different. So my understanding of shamanism is basically going back to nature, and that is what makes shamanism similar in many cultures, is that nature is the core of the understanding of what it means to be a human being and how to relate to aspects of oneself, and understanding oneself in relationship to nature. So nature becomes the guiding light. So this is my understanding of shamanism, which is a little bit different from anthropological understanding. So, people at university may disagree slightly with me, because shamanism in anthropology means very specific things.
Okay, how to apply the experience gathered in shamanism in the Western way of life?
I think it's very difficult to apply shamanism in its pure form in Western civilization, because like in Croatia, England, America, the culture is totally different than the Amazon forest or Siberia. The whole setting and the reference that people engage their whole being by is so different that you can't just change, shamanism and say, okay, let's move it to Croatia and see how it works. But I think you can take some of the very vital core beliefs and apply them here in Croatia. And that is, respecting nature and coming back to the laws of nature, which basically is harmony, and living in balance with nature, and bring that belief system into our culture. And also as an individual, bring that back into our way of relating to nature and to people. And in a practical sense, I think this means letting go of the stress and addictions we have to getting more of specific things, and coming back to the simplicity of real values.
Can you explain your first encounter with shamanism in South America?
Well, my first encounter was a little bit strange, just because I was going there on a conservation project, so I didn't really have an idea that I was going out there to learn or understand shamanism in any way. I was there to work with the rainforest and the destruction of the rainforest. So it was strange simply because the people that I met within the rainforest were so very different, and their reactions and their way of life were so very different. It made me think about my own value system and my own way of doing things, just because when you are with people who do things very differently, you begin to wonder why you do things the way you do, why you think the way you do, why you feel the way you do, why do you place value on certain things that other people find very funny. So my first encounter was a challenge of belief systems.
What are the main features of the native people in South America, in Amazon?
The main features? I would say the main features depend on which culture you work with, because in the Amazon there's not one specific culture, there are many various ones in the rainforest. And the culture that I worked with basically used herbal remedies a lot, so they were known as the doctors of South America, because if anyone got sick or was unwell, this was a place that people went to for, like the last minute possibility of surviving cancer or whatever, it was a desperate way of trying to resolve a physical problem. So people from Brazil and Peru, if doctors said, sorry, you have cancer and you have no possibility of treating this, they would go to these people because they were well known as healers. So that the culture there was very specific to healing. And this is basically what made this culture very different. In Spanish, that is known as curandero, which means someone who heals. Yeah, I would say that is, the highlight of the culture, and there are many remedies that are used and very specific ways of using them that is part of the culture, but also part of what they do to help other people come for healing, which is what I learned while there, just by accident.
Yes, your opinion about ayahuasca. Is it necessary to drink it in Amazon River with shamans, or it can be brewed here in Europe and drink? Is that environment necessary?
Ayahuasca is the medicine of the rainforest, and you have to drink ayahuasca when you live in the rainforest, simply because medically it clears out parasites from the system, and parasites in the rainforest are one of the major killers, of children and young people, simply because they are not good parasites, they are really vicious, not nice ones. And ayahuasca basically purges all that is inside. And so it has developed because the ceremony of using ayahuasca has developed because of the physical need of that environment. And from there, for thousands of years, people have been using ayahuasca, so have understood how to use it, not just in a physical sense, but also in a cultural sense. So there is a support system that is impossible to understand if you don't live in the culture or understand the culture for a very long time. So to transport that to the West, I feel then basically what is transported is a very superficial layer of the ceremony, and often it becomes mixed up with the idea of drugs, which of course in the Amazon forest it's far removed from that idea, because they don't see ayahuasca as drugs, they see it as a vital medicine, just as people would see an aspirin here as a vital medicine if you have a headache. They don't question why it's necessary, but here I would question, what is the intention behind using ayahuasca? And the person using ayahuasca, are they really clear inside of themselves, and do they have the capacity to transmit what has been learned for thousands of years in one culture, to the West, which is so very different? I would be hesitant to use ayahuasca here.
Yes, this was the next question. What is the reason for the prohibition of ayahuasca, DMT, and other points in Western civilization through restrictive law?
Well, I feel that the Western law is based on medical terminology, and from that perspective, of course, a lot of what is in ayahuasca can be quite dangerous in a physical sense, if misunderstood. And the medical system doesn't really understand ayahuasca, understands the ingredients in ayahuasca. So, they look at the physical properties of certain ingredients, and they can be dangerous if isolated. Being separate from ayahuasca can cause damage. But also ayahuasca can cause damage when used in the wrong way. It can cause, in my opinion, brain damage. So your brain function works differently after taking ayahuasca for a long time. So it's, you have to know what you're doing, just like
it needs a professional hand.
It needs professional hands. But I don't feel the medical system is professional in that sense, because they're addressing the drug aspect of it. But at the same time, I don't believe that people, because I know in Holland, for example, it's quite popular now to use ayahuasca. I don't believe that professionalism is in the people using it there. So I think really what has to be understood is that ayahuasca is a medicine, but how can we use it in a healthy way here? And that means people have to drop the idea of drugs. And most people are attracted to ayahuasca because, it changes consciousness. And they're looking at that as the primary reference to why they need to use ayahuasca, rather than, the whole big picture, the art, the poetry, the songs, the healing methods, all that is lost usually.
Yes. Did the Amazonian tribes manage to preserve all their culture and knowledge despite the conquistadors and the Western civilization?
No, absolutely not. The Spanish and the Portuguese on one level were very good at suppressing culture, and it's not their fault. It's just historic. It's a historic thing behind it, and what that meant for the Spanish, if anyone believed anything that didn't fit into the Spanish culture, then they were killed because they were seen as going against the culture and the church and whatever, politics of the dominating people who were the Spanish at that time, and the Portuguese after a little while. So the native culture had to adapt and hide behind certain things, certain belief systems. So basically they used the belief systems to hide their own belief systems. So a lot of what is used in the culture today, in the native culture today, it has very interesting overtones, and they are obviously not native. And for people who don't understand, it looks like they have adopted Western culture, but actually it was just a survival method of hiding the truth of their culture, so that only people who understood would understand what is behind the symbolism that is more Western, often religious. The religious culture of native people it became very Christian on the surface, but actually underneath there was other things. I think it has changed simply because today people are forgetting, what was hidden, and having to be reminded because the elders or the old people are no longer so interested in passing that information to people. Because the young people today are more interested in Western culture, TV, money, going out to the cities away from nature, because Western culture has an attraction to native culture. It seems exciting and exotic, and so they want to try it. And usually when they try going to the city or watching TV, there's a lot of problems, like alcohol problems, which is never there from before. They bring that into the native culture. So basically, native culture today more than ever is being destroyed internally rather than externally. Externally, people are trying to preserve the culture, but it doesn't really work because the whole society, Western society, is so strong around them. So, they're not an island anymore, far removed from cities of South America. The rainforest is very accessible by plane, by roads usually, and those people coming in a lot more. And Western people, Americans and Europeans come in the touristic way, but they don't realize how damaging it is for the culture, to be in a native culture that doesn't know how to deal with certain things, because they've lived a lifestyle that is never had that inside. Photographs, TV, cameras, all the things. It's all new. They can't adapt to it so easily. So the answer would be yes. It's changing. The culture is changing, and for this reason, I have written the books that I've written to somehow bring some of the essence of that culture and knowledge a little bit more to fit into the Western mind, so that they can see how it's not so different. Some of the knowledge that they have is actually quite useful to be applied here in the West. And I think that's one way of preserving the knowledge that some of that information is everywhere, because soon I feel we'll be there in the rainforest. It's not pessimistic; it's just realistic. Just because everything changes, and they will adopt their lifestyle to what is around them. There are some cultures in South America who are doing things differently, like I can't remember the name. I think they wear things through their nose, and they're in the north of Brazil. I didn't work so much in the north of Brazil, more in the south, and they are the famous rock stars Sting. They are trying to create something that stops any changes from happening, but the fact that they're going to the West and introducing their culture to the West means that they're adopting their language and their lifestyle a little bit to transmit their knowledge to the West in a way that's understandable to Western people. So it's changing, even though it looks like they're not changing so much because of the way they dress and their language and their songs. It is changing. There is an internal stress in their culture, and I don't think it will last very long. But it's right.
What do you think about Carlos Castaneda and his books? Is he preserver of this ancient knowledge, or is he?
Well, Carlos Castaneda was a very clever writer, and I'm not putting him down just because actually what he transmitted is very interesting, because a lot of it is quite, it's to do with the Mexican culture, but he played around a little bit with knowledge and made it fit into a very interesting way, that fits into the Western mind, and with this sort of teacher, who knows everything, and the student who slowly learns little bit by bit. He was a very good writer, and managed to engage people and their interest and their curiosity, and just caught something at that moment. But as for really transmitting a culture, I don't think he did that, but I think he transmitted the possibility of knowing that another culture can have something very interesting, so it helps anthropologists and writers and many other people to really investigate that culture more deeply and to have a more interesting approach to it, rather than just looking at it from the outside, to go in and learn from within the culture. So I think he started a movement. I'm not sure if he preserved anything. I like his books, but there are questions about it. There are many questions. If you really know what he's speaking about, I wouldn't really say that they're anthropologically correct.
Mayan calendar is now also a very big mainstream topic. What do you think about it?
Yeah, I like Mayan calendar. I think also, Mexico is a very interesting country, and I think Mexico, out of all the South American cultures, besides Argentina, has been very much influenced by the Western culture. So a lot of the knowledge was forgotten. So even the Mayan calendar, is not alive for the native Mayan people, because the Mayan people actually forgot a lot of their cultural belief systems. So it has been revived by certain people who say they know the meaning of the Mayan calendar, and I'm not really sure if they know everything in a clear way that's being portrayed today in the West. So I would take some of what is being said a little bit, I would listen to it and a little bit carefully, I think people like to have a black and white, this is what's going to happen, and the Mayan calendar says this, so then it's going to be like this. I don't think it. I think the Mayan calendar is much more flexible. It's more like a Chinese puzzle. You can really look at it in many different ways, so it's not so clear cut. But I think basically the information is correct, and it's interesting to use, because the Western calendar is actually a totally an intellectual calendar, and it has no relationship to real time, like the moon or the sun. It was just invented to fit into a whole philosophy, which created a structure of a calendar that is not relevant to the seasons or to biorhythms, and the Mayan calendar is much more like that. But there are many other calendars. It's not just the Mayan calendar. There is the ancient Persian calendar. There is, I'm sure in Croatia there were calendars, pre-Christian calendars that were used to, tell about seasons and foretell about things that may happen in the future. So I don't see the Mayan calendar as the answer to everything, but I see it as an important reference point.
New question: is there a link between Egypt and South America?
I believe there is a link. That I worked a little bit with some of the theories of archaeologist, who's a Norwegian archaeologist, whose name is Thor Heyerdahl, and he actually he didn't prove, but he showed that it was possible that Egyptians, using the materials that were grown during the pharaohic times, used boats to travel further away from Egypt and followed the currents. And the currents basically went to South America from the Mediterranean down to South America through the Amazon forest. And it has been discovered by many archaeologists. The remains of things that show very interesting similarities to what is in Egypt, archaeologically, and very similar. And also culturally, there are some interesting points. As an anthropologist, you could study those points, and they're very similar in language and certain belief systems. And for me, growing up in Egypt, I just had the feeling of Egypt. And in some places, it definitely felt that there was a connection. Just the structures and certain things, that you can't really say exactly what they are. It's just a feeling that there is a deep connection between the two cultures. And I think, why not? People were not stupid 2,000 years ago. They had a lot more knowledge than we give them credit today. And I think people traveled a lot in the past, and there was an interaction. And Egypt, was a civilization that was much more than what we think. And it was important for them to travel and to speak to different cultures that they knew existed. So there was a strong interaction, and Thor Heyerdahl proved that it was possible, in a physical sense. A goat managed to get to South America, and further from South America go to Easter Island. So it's an interesting philosophy.
With that factor on our minds, is there a possibility of existence more ancient continents like Atlantis or more? What do you think?
Well, again, there is the New Age, which believes, very categorically that there are certain things, and then, there's a strong idea about what Atlantis might mean. And I think there was an Atlantis, but I don't believe it to be in that sort of amazing Atlantean sort of cultural belief that, there are people who are super civilized and beyond, anything that we understand today. I think that people just had an internal knowledge and a deep peace inside of themselves, which allowed them to look at other value systems, which means that they were actually more advanced than the Western culture, because the Western culture, without putting it down, is basically into survival. If you look at people today, it's all about the economy and will it crash, and what's going to happen to the euro, and basically, if you look at it from an anthropological point of view, it's the fear of not surviving or not enough, which is a survival thing, and it's valid to some point, but beyond that point, it is very stupid, and because it means that all our attention goes to like primitive people, and having to find the food and store it and gather it and hold on to it and hope that in winter it won't disappear. It doesn't leave much room for another civilization to develop, which I believe is what's being forced upon us now, that a new civilization is being asked to develop beyond that fear-based old paradigm. And without that, I think that there's going to be a problem in the world. But the Atlantean people and the civilizations of Lu may have been, beyond that fear paradigm and developed in a way which we don't see. We don't, our consciousness is related to, economy, sociology, dualism of the West, what I have and what I don't have, me and him and me and that. And so, we don't recognize this. And, people may think what I'm saying sounds a little bit silly, but, if you look at the British people when they went out to Australia, they looked at Aboriginals as wild animals, because for them they couldn't understand that they actually had a brain. They couldn't, they were just out there, doing whatever, which looked to them like animals, because they didn't have reference points of understanding that Aboriginals actually paint, and they sing, and they dance, and they do things that for them are much more important than, the British, however many hundred years ago, and that is building cities and, doing things that for Western people is very important. I think that's what frustrates artists and poets and more creative people, because, everything is judged in terms of money, which is, our Western culture. Today, at least.
Which is wrong, I think.
Well, it looks like it.
What is your favorite shamanic practice?
I would say, for me, personally, it's healing. Just because I've always, as a child, been excited about plants and the potential of their use to heal people and create happiness, take away the suffering that is quite common. And the respect of nature and the work with nature, to bring that into our daily life. I would say those two things, for me, personally, are the most important.
What do you think about the concept of visualization and the conflict of intention and will?
Well, for me, visualization is a great thing, because imagination is such an amazing part of every human being. Imagination is a strong tool. But I believe that people use visualization a little bit too mentally. It's this idea of trying to change belief systems using the intellect rather than feeling. So imagination for me can only really be understood through deep feeling, and this is where intention is important, because intention is really much more from the heart, much more from that space where you feel your imagination rather than think your imagination. And willpower is the same. Willpower is basically using the mind to challenge a feeling and say, that feeling is no longer valid, so, I want to change it. And the will to change something can only work in the conscious level of the mind, which is 5% of the brain, or 10% of the brain. But the unconscious is much more connected to the deeper feelings. And without looking at that, then I feel that we can only reach 10% of the potential of what is possible through imagination, which is not a lot, if you look at what is possible to reach through imagination, using 90%, which is the feeling, then I think you can change everything. You can even change the economy just by using a little bit more creative imagination. So it's not something that, is just an idea that you sit and, try to imagine your life better. It's actually a practical way of changing real, everyday experiences and problems that people think there is no solution to.
What is more important, internal or external personal quest?
I would say that the internal is the most important, just because in the Western culture we are external. Everything from the age of 2 becomes external. We socialize everyone to understand that the outside is what has to be dealt with strongly, and the internal gets forgotten. So for Western people, I would say the internal quest is what needs to be highlighted.
This may be a very tough question or maybe a very easy question. What is the meaning of the life?
No, it's not tough. I think the meaning of life is for everyone to come back to a sense of deep joy and deep freedom. And I don't think that joy or freedom is very easily understood, because sometimes people feel that, you know, freedom is just having enough money or doing whatever that allows you to be free to be yourself. But actually freedom in the real deep sense is much more complex, and that is a sense where you're not burdened by the internal addictions of the mind or your inner self, and you're free of them to such an extent where you can just act upon really what is there outside and inside, which is basically you're just yourself. It sounds much easier to say than to put into practice. And by being yourself, there is a natural joy that happens, which is not the same joy as, you know, winning €1 million, or the same joy as, you know, completing a task. It's more a joy that is just present when you know you're flowing with everything that is in harmony with yourself and around you. And I think this is the meaning of life for everyone. Most people don't understand this, simply because we are always chasing something, an idea. But I think in the end, everyone has to face themselves. And if they don't face themselves in life, then, you know, at the end, when you face death, you'll be facing yourself with the lack of understanding of what you have been doing or could have been doing in life. So there is no escape from facing yourself. It's just we have the choice to do it now or wait to a point where, you know, it is quite complex to face yourself because you only have a few moments to be conscious. So, you know, I would say the meaning of life is to use every moment as it's your last and see the true value of that moment rather than the ideas that your mind presents as important.
Okay, the spiritual blockade in Western society is pretty obvious, but is there an intention to spiritual blockade in Western countries from some force, some high force, politics or something?
I think politicians are interesting people simply because they are fulfilling everyone's idea of what needs to be done. So they think that they're great people and they have an overinflated ego, perhaps, not all, but some. But actually it's not their fault. It's simply because we support that ego being there, meaning, you know, the masses. So they're just puppets to societal norms, and it's the same with many other institutions and higher forces, you know, that seem to control people. But actually it's the other way around. We've allowed those institutions to be there, and we support them to somehow manipulate us, meaning, you know, individuals. So it's not that we have to look at the institutions as the wrong institutions, but often institutions don't like to change. And when the masses begin to change, you know, a lot, then basically the individuals change quicker. So the institutions need a little bit of reminding that you know, they need to change.
We will conclude the first part of this interview with question: which social system would be the best for transformation of the human consciousness to the higher level?
I think there is no social system that is best, because every social system depends on the individuals within that system. So even ideal systems, for example, maybe socialism started as an ideal system, but then the end gets influenced by the people running the system, and sometimes turns into less than ideal. So I think it has to start from inside. The system has to be an inspiration from inside. And the best system is to really start with family, and that the family unit is a healthy one. Because once you have healthy family units, they build other units around those family units to more healthy systems, which then becomes an internal system rather than an imposed one from outside. And this takes time. This is why I feel that working with children is very important. Because, the children are the future, so they become the parents of grandchildren, and they can change the world much more, I believe, than politics and certain economic changes, because in the end, people are quite robotic, and will fall back into the unconscious addictions that they have to certain behaviors and certain ways of doing things, and we need to start early. So I feel that education and family units is the best system to change.
Okay. Short break.